The longest running, weirdest, loneliest enigma in popular music is a guy from Texas who calls himself Jandek.
Jandek is not a rock star. He's completely outside the paradigm of rock music or any kind of music. Jandek makes Jandek art.
When you listen to Jandek, you really sort of have to evaluate what your assumptions are about what counts as rock music, what counts as good music. You have to think about music in a different way after listening to Jandek.
They told me about you.
My reaction to hearing about it was a lot stronger than my reaction to actually hearing it. I was much more interested in the idea that there was this, reclusive guy writing these songs that made no sense.
That effect comes across of somebody who's just a bit deranged, and add to the antisocial element and you think, well, isn't that the basic ingredients of a sociopath?
You are undeniably underground, and you are the king of it. I mean, you are the best at being underground of anyone.
This is like people's raw emotions. This is some music that captures the heart of someone without a lot of bullshit.
So if you're willing to trust your ears and your emotions, and you're willing to let something like that in other words, if you're willing to answer the door and open it without looking through the peephole first, then you can be a Jandek fan.
Hello, my name is Michael, and I obsess. I come across something that grabs me and I consume until I can't take anymore, and then I'm on to the next. Some obsessions last a week, others a lifetime. It is my intention to explore these obsessions with you as they occur while the passion is hot. Welcome to Eclectic Obsessions. In 2003, I saw a documentary called Jandek on Corwood about outsider musician Jandek. I was completely mesmerized by the story of this artist whom I had never heard, or even heard of. For an hour and a half, I learned enough to become compelled by the enigma of Corwood Industries. We will be exploring the first 6 albums of Jandek on this episode of Eclectic Obsessions. Jandek is the musical project of Corwood Industries, a record label operating out of Houston, Texas. Since 1978, Jandek and Corwood have independently released over 100 albums and DVDs of unusual, often emotionally dissolute folk and blues songs without ever granting more than the occasional interview or providing any biographical information. Jandek recordings have varied widely in style, but are most commonly associated with a highly idiosyncratic and frequently atonal form of folk and blues music, often using an open tuning and unconventional chord structure. Jandek's music is unique, but the lyrics closely mirror the country blues and folk traditions of East Texas. The name Jandek is intended to refer specifically to the musical project and not an individual. Many of the albums feature photos of a Caucasian man at various ages. Although it seemed likely that this man was the principal performer, the presumption was not certain until his live debut in 2004. Jandek now often performs live with other musicians, but these collaborations remain the extent of his engagement with the public. He was rumored to have grown up or at least spent time in Providence, Rhode Island. A handful of early Jandek songs mention either the state itself or the Rhode Island town of Point Judith. It has also been suggested that he is well-traveled, as several album sleeves depict locations that have been formally identified as being outside of the United States. Jandek's first album, Ready for the House, although obviously a solo work, was originally credited to a band called The Units. Corwood Industries was legally forced to change the name The Units by an identically named Californian group already in possession of a trademark on the name. All reissues of the first album and all subsequent Corwood releases have been credited to Jandek.
Originally I had called the thing The Units. The first album had 1,000 done under that name. And it was, in my first mailings out and everything, it was playlisted in a couple of stations in Colorado Springs and Denver. I don't even think they do this kind of music, and I think they went to a classical format or something. But anyway, back in '78, it was playlisted there, and it got around a little bit, and I was sending some of it out, and I sent some out to. One time I tried sending copies to record stores to see if I could get orders, but I guess they just kept them all because I never got any response out of that. But I sent some to a record store in San Francisco, and I got a real nasty letter from somebody who sent me registered mail, an entire portfolio of his group called The Units, and the fact that they were on record in Washington and everything with the name, and that if I didn't cease and desist using it, they were going to sue me. And they had done it before, and they assured me that it would be found in their favor. So I said, well, the heck with this, and I just tried to find out some name that nobody would use. And I was speaking with, it was January, and I was speaking with somebody on the phone named Decker. So I just combined the two. It seemed to be something that not too many people would pick.
One early theory suggested that all the music was recorded in a single, feverish, possibly manic phase, and that after 19 albums the releases would stop. This appeared at the time as if it might have had some validity. The 21st album, Lost Cause, finished with a sidelong piece called The Electric End, a crazed instrumental featuring shouted vocals, electric guitar, and microphone feedback. Instead, this seems to have marked the end of the first band phase. Then the 22nd album arrived and returned to the acoustic and vocal sound that is found on most of the first 6 Corwood albums, often referred to as the first acoustic phase. This continued unabated for 7 albums until, in 1999, The Beginning was released, which ended with a 15-minute-long work of instrumental piano. This ushered in the most controversial period of albums in Corwood's history. 3 albums of unaccompanied voice. Seemingly recorded on a voice-activated tape recorder, these spoken-word songs ran up to half an hour in length and taxed even the most devoted followers. After these albums, though, the direction changed again, and Jandek returned to a voice and guitar mixture with occasional harmonica, though the approach was different than the earlier recordings. The guitar was often electric, and the voice was decidedly older than that on the previous albums. Further albums have continued the solo approach, though the instrument used has occasionally been a fretless bass, and the songs have stretched progressively longer, and the lyrics have become even more personal. Though Corwood still releases albums like this, they are now alternated with releases of the live band shows, which are remarkably different and feature unusually tight playing. The mystery of Jandek's identity was partially resolved in October 2004 when he performed live at the Install 04 Music Festival in Glasgow, Scotland. This was Jandek's first known live appearance, and he performed with Richard Youngs on bass and Alex Nielsen on drums. The man on stage was obviously the same man who appears on the album covers. Per Corwood's stipulations, the performance was not publicized in advance, nor was it identified as it happened or at any point afterwards. The man who performed alongside Youngs and Nielsen was identified only as a representative of Corwood Industries. 2006 saw the release of the first Corwood DVD, a video version of Jandek's first live performance.
Inordinately private person that kind of have declined interviews and things like that because I just put out a product and that's it. I don't want to get too involved.
Ready for the House. Ready for the House is the debut studio album by Jandek and was released in 1978 by the Corwood Industries label with the catalog number 0739. The album has been reissued 3 times on CD, first in 1999, then sometime in the early 2000s, and again in 2005. Jackpot Records, with exclusive permission from Corwood, reissued the album on LP in 2008. Ready for the House was a mostly acoustic guitar and vocal record of ethereal, shambling post-blues form. It set the stage for one of the most individualistic and fascinating bodies of work in contemporary music. The original LP was issued in a color sleeve, featuring a mundane but striking image of a living room, chair, and table. No other information was ever offered. The music on the album consists of Jandek's wavering voice and a guitar pick gently plucking very oddly tuned guitar strings. The guitar playing, which many refer to as untuned, is in fact tuned to what the artist has referred to as a black key sound. 8 of the 9 tracks largely repeat the same slow, slightly bluesy tempo with similar vocal delivery. On the ending track, European Jewel Incomplete, Jandek switches from the acoustic to a strummed electric guitar that approaches standard tuning, and instead of picking the strings, Jandek bars the frets. In the middle of one line, the song abruptly cuts off, leading one to think that the tape has run out or that an error has occurred with the reel-to-reel recorder, and the album unexpectedly ends. The song would be resumed on Chair Beside a Window, beginning with the last 3 lines of the incomplete version, and then continuing on with the missing lyrics. It is unknown when this album was originally recorded. On Ready for the House and its follow-up 6 and 6, Jandek's voice sounds the youngest out of all of his output. Corwood has provided very little in the way of background information on any of Jandek's albums, let alone Ready for the House. The only information that they were able to provide was that 1,000 copies were pressed of Ready for the House, whereas all subsequent recordings were pressed in quantities of 300, although it is not known if any were repressed. There seems to be no precedent for the kind of music Jandek releases, and almost every aspect of the project seems to be without influence. One could argue that bands such as the Fugs and the Gods are similar in an untrained DIY-type music. But it is unknown if Corwood Industries was aware of these bands, and the Jandek releases are very removed even within that context. Because of aforementioned reasons, critiquing the work becomes difficult. The Jandek project also references itself exclusively and is almost entirely self-contained. As it remains today, Ready for the House sounded like no other record, and it's doubtful that more than a handful of copies were sold at the time.
After the morning, you've had your rest. Time to go naked in the afternoon. Take off your hat, take off your coat. Big time in the city, you've had your rest. I got a letter. You are a cowboy, read in the paper, big time in the city. It's time to go naked in the afternoon.
Matter of fact, the first review I got was what kept me going, because I did one album and then for 2 years I didn't do anything, and then I had a review from Philip Milstein in Out Magazine, and well, I better keep going, and that's sort of what kept me going, because I got 1,000 of the first one done. I thought I was, had a pretty good thing, but I didn't get any response.
6 and 6. 6 and 6 is the second studio album by Jandek and the first to be released under the Jandek name. It was released in 1981 by Corwood Industries as 0740. There have been 2 CD reissues so far, each adding more silence between the tracks. This album appeared 3 years after Ready for the House, which remains the longest interval between Jandek albums so far. It is composed mainly of slow songs, most of which deal with topics like regret and hopelessness. The music is stark and slow, with a flattened-out dissonant blues sound. The cover image, reminiscent of the famous photo of Robert Johnson, is a photo of Jandek himself. It is one of the best-known images of him. Even more than the first LP, this is the distilled essence of Jandek, the baseline from which the rest of his music develops. Though the songs here are only minimally differentiated musically, the lyrics are uncommonly vivid, poetic, and far-ranging. Upon its release, 6 and 6 defined Jandek as a significant album artist, featuring some of his most mesmerizing variations of trance blues, especially the 10-minute centerpiece, I Knew You Would Leave.
As it shines like smooth silver. But you know there's more than this, 'cause you can see the boats sailing. And the gulls fly by fishing, and there's a lighthouse in the distance, but it's all so quiet that why disturb the silence so? Go wait in the moonlight and bring back a starfish. Settle back easy and make up your mind to stay. I've earned a fortune and there's not much more to say. I'm living easy, smooth as silk these days. I see that you're beautiful, haven't changed your ways. Settle back easy and make up your mind to stay. The country's cleaner and I've earned a fortune and you don't have to pay. Just settle back easy and make up your mind to stay.
I send it out to, it must be 40 radio stations, and it's playlisted regularly. Usually it's something like, a friend of mine had some of your records, and I heard them the other night, and I thought they were really good, and can you send me some?
Later on. Later on is the third studio album by American singer-songwriter Jandek, released by Corwood Industries as 0741 in 1981. It was reissued on CD in 2000. As with the prior 6 and 6 and most of Ready for the House, this is a stark acoustic and vocals album with roots in Delta blues. Unlike the first two, however, the pace is picked up a bit and there are other musicians present, or the harmonica appearing for the first time may be overdubbed. Jandek starts to experiment with his sound. The album finds Jandek shifting moods in bipolar frequency, and also finds him starting to attack the guitar rather than play. You can actually hear some of the tracks start to fall apart, offering some sweet respite with the beautiful Jessica and Jackson's Gone Down the Mississippi, only to blow it all up with closer The Second End that features the plunky grating sound that will become more prevalent later in Jandek's career. The song The Janitor would receive a sequel 8 years later on the album The Living End with the song Janitor's Dead.
Joy to the world. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
I have no real connections here in Houston musically with any other people except where I have the records produced and, the studio.
Chair Beside a Window. Chair Beside a Window is the fourth album by avant-folk blues singer-songwriter Jandek and Corwood Industries' first release of 1982 as 0742. Combining just the right sense of depression, mysteriousness, and spirituality that makes Jandek's work so intriguing. The guitar tuning has changed since Ready for the House, but it still comes nowhere near standard or even any of the typical aberrant tunings. The grainy, haunted beauty of Jandek's early work went through many phases, never quite as varied and multifaceted as the material on this album. The relatively wide range of Chair Beside a Window gives insight into the influences on the seemingly impenetrable Jandek sound. Hearing the blown-out harmonica bluster of You Think You Know How to Score, it's hard not to imagine it as the Jandek equivalent of a Dylan phase, however insanely translated. Most notable in terms of both variants and firsts is the standout track Nancy Sings, featuring the first time we hear an outside vocalist. This song, a sad and empty blues featuring stunning female vocals, could easily be argued for as the moment freak folk was born. It is also the first album to reprise the song European Jewel after its incomplete version abruptly ended Jandek's debut album 4 years prior. Nods to folk blues, early gospel, and even some strange takes on group jams appear. The layers of intentions and emotional frequency are always a mystery, but the mystery is more colorful and relatable here than it ever was before.
To the sound of a constant fall, skies give water for life of all. If you reach into the air, rain will come to kiss your hair.
I've only sold about 150 copies in the last 5 years. Let's see, I started in 78, released only 9 albums. It's not really that cost intensive. I can get 300 done for, let's see, the black and whites go for about 600, and the colors go for about 800. I figure I can't go less than 2 a year. If I do, I'll really go into obscurity, which is, maybe the case anyway. 2 to 3 a year should be my target. I can afford that, I think. I don't have many hobbies or anything.
Living in a Moon So Blue. Living in a Moon So Blue is the 5th Jandek album and was issued as Corwood 0743 in 1982. It was reissued on CD in 2001. The title for this one actually comes from a lyric from his track Can I See Your Clock from his second LP 6 and 6, and so one can already see the artist creating an oeuvre filled with allusions, hints, and motifs. Herein lies one of Jandek's peculiar charms, his song's resilience. We find him in a more aggressive mode, singing and playing here like he really means it. All in all, Living in a Moon So Blue is one of his best, the presentation and approach seemingly from a different time altogether. Many Jandek collectors believe Living in a Moon So Blue to be the apex of his extensive catalog. It is an album that's very hard to separate from its near counterparts staring at the cellophane. Both albums feature the same parlor guitar on the cover, just from slightly different views, and the contents are remarkably similar, with Jandek delving further into the deep anarchic blues, while putting aside for now the female vocals and any instruments besides guitar, vocals, and harmonic. The album is also distinguished by lean, blues-flavored songs with minimal lyrics, though these lyrics can run from brutal to humorously baffling. The music itself runs from fast, rhythmic blues pounded out on the oddly tuned strings to slow-picked ballads. The vocals are at other times otherworldly, at times visceral, and at times barely there at all. Living in a Moon So Blue displays an emotional power not often heard on record, and if Jandek's seemingly improvised stream of consciousness music does not send shivers down the spine, it will certainly provoke confusion or joy in those interested in outsider art.
been on heavy airplay in San Francisco for about 5 or 6, maybe even 8 months. The cuts that have a lot of guitar work as opposed to lyrics. The ones that are heavy with lyrics are usually written.
Staring at the Cellophane. Staring at the Cellophane is the 6th Jandek album and his 3rd of 1982. It was released as Corwood 0744 and was reissued on CD in 2001. The cover image appears to be the same picture taken for his previous album, Living in a Moon So Blue, only from a different angle. The focus here is on a very singular mid-tempo acoustic guitar sound, with special attention to fingerpicking. The instrumental This Is For You and semi-instrumental basic themes stand out, and even most of the other pieces seem more concerned with the guitar than Jandek's usual depressed lyrical statements. The big exceptions are the muted hard-strum violence of Sand Eye, which is mostly instrumental but quite different from the melancholy plucked string approach, and a weird history lesson called Napoleon in Russia. Within the realm of his own catalog, such slight variations can seem like leaps in style. As in the folk and blues traditions, versions of the same song can be worlds apart. While Jandek's defiant minor key stumbling hardly comes under any genre umbrella, essential values of folk music are present in Staring at the Cellophane, in that he revisits his own self-defined formula yet again, in a move that can be interpreted as either incessant repetition or self-reinvention depending on how you look at it. Either way, this album is as strikingly unique as any Jandek album, in that there is still no comparison to this outsider artist's music.
Go home.
Well, I guess the epitome of the whole thing was that there was a review in Hop magazine, and thank goodness most of the people, except probably John Foster, gave me pretty good reviews in that magazine. Anyway, they had a review in there of one of the more recent ones, and it says, "May he never tune his guitar." And a lot of other reviews would say, just make reference to, total, lack of tuning. The fact of the matter is, I tune the guitar regularly, at least before, each session, and frequently within the session, between cuts. But I don't use, although I studied music earlier in my life, I don't tune according to, scales or things. I just tune it so that it sounds the way I want it to sound.
Okay, cards on the table. I have a very hard time listening to Jandek for pleasure. I have a very hard time listening to Jandek, period. But there is something I find incredibly compelling about his music and story. I don't expect many of you to run out and buy up the albums, but do check out the wonderful documentary Jandek on Corwood. Then you can listen to his music online and make your own decisions. I have been obsessed with him for years. Thank you for listening to Eclectic Obsessions. If you like what you've heard, please download past episodes and subscribe on iTunes for future releases. You can follow the show on Facebook at Eclectic Obsessions, on Twitter at Eclectic Obsess1, on Instagram at Eclectic Obsessions Podcast, and on YouTube at Eclectic Obsessions. I'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to email the show at ecobpod@gmail.com. We'll be back in 1 month's time with a new Eclectic Obsession.